Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, I will be talking about the aesthetics in the Quran and how uh, we can actually approach or explore uh, Quranic aesthetics. Now, as I think it doesn't need to be, said that this is a topic which actually needs many lectures, and we can hardly touch the tip of the iceberg in just one lecture. So what I intend to do is that I intend to give you just a brief outline of what I think are the important things to be borne in mind when we talk about Quranic aesthetics. I will be talking particularly about Quran with reference to its oral quality. I will be explaining what I mean by that. So I won't be talking about Quranic calligraphy, which is in itself a project that Muslims have ever since Quran's revelation been very much interested in, and which Muslims have in fact perfected. And I won't be talking of some other dimensions of Quranic beauty or Quranic aesthetics. This I'm trying to say at the outset because I think that it is seminal to the very being, to the very ontology of the Quran. And in the course of my lecture, I would be explaining how this concept of word and its articulation and the entire process of recitation and listening, these are the primary modes in which Quran was revealed in the first place, and it was experienced by its first recipients, by its first addressees. I think that this aspect of the Quran is also one of those aspects which is very often ignored, and not much attention is given to it, especially in the non-Arab context, that is our context, because we don't know Arabic. So most of us know the Quran or learn about the Quran only from translations. A few of us who are able to read the Quran in its original language are able to, somehow get the feel of what the original must feel like. Although the competence that is actually required, I mean the linguistic competence and linguistic proficiency which is actually required to appreciate the aesthetic dimension of the Quran is not easily, is not easily available to us. And that is why it remains a challenge especially for the non-Arabs. Now, interestingly, it is Quran itself that stresses this aspect, which I will try to unpack during the course of my lecture. This particular aspect of Quran, its aesthetic dimension, or its the dimension of its beauty. And secondly, it was important for its first addressees, that is the people to whom Quran spoke for the first time. It was important for them. And as we will go through this lecture, I will be taking you along, and I will be discussing with you some of the incidents which have been reported and recorded in our traditional books, which actually tell us how Quran was received by these people, and how in fact the first conversions took place because the recitation of the Quran struck them as something. In fact, subsequently, from the 9th century onwards, an entire discourse arose, and it took shape that was called the discourse on Ijazul Quran, that is the miraculous nature of Quran, or what is sometimes also translated as the inimitability of the Quran, which I may not have time to discuss here. If I have some a few moments left, then I might talk about it. Anyway, Quran's beauty, as per the Quran itself, the suggestions of the Quran, and as per the earliest scholars who worked on this aspect of the Quran, is not incidental. It's not something, what you might today call something super added to the Quran. In fact, it is constitutive of the very being of the Quran. And this is one point that I want to stress, and I expect you to keep this one point in your mind, because this is something that I will be keep coming back to again and again. That the beauty of the Quran is not something which is super added to it. That is, it is not something which is contingent, which is incidental, and Quran could otherwise also have existed without this particular aspect. So this is something that actually sets Quran apart from many other scriptures of the world, something which I will have occasion to talk about in the course of my lecture. And lastly, something that you must remember is that when I say that this aspect of the Quran is ignored, it is not given the kind of recognition that it deserves, I have one particular problem or one particular issue in mind, which is that Quran is not a book of philosophy or a book of logic. It has never claimed to be a book of philosophy, nor has it ever been read as a book of philosophy or a book of logic. It has certain propositions or statements or positions which, of course, are of philosophical nature because they deal with the ultimate questions of existence. But basically, when you talk about the nature of this revelation, the nature of the revelation is not philosophical in that sense, because although Quran does appeal to reason, and we hear it, said by scholars, and rightly so, that Quran actually invites us to reflect upon it. It says, "Afala yatadabbaruna al-Quran, afala taqilun, afala yaqilun," so on and so forth. It invites us to reflect on its content. But that is not the only thing that it does, because the way Quran works on us goes beyond this discursive framework, or to put it in layman's language, it does not merely appeal to our rational part. It does not merely appeal to our intellect. And we know that the kind of discourse or the kind of writing that does not merely appeal to our intellect, unlike philosophy or logic, the immediate thing that comes to our minds is poetry. And I will be talking about Quran and poetry in detail. And I will be talking about how Quran at the same time is and is not poetry. So we'll be talking about why it was important for Quran to dissociate itself from contemporary poetry, but at the same time why Quran was preeminently poetic. So this is something that I would be talking about. Now, aesthetics, as everybody perhaps knows, is something that deals with the questions of beauty. It is a well-established subject in contemporary times. After 18th century European Enlightenment, it was established as a subject, and many philosophers wrote very detailed works on the concept of aesthetics and why it matters. Roots were there in the classical times, and one of the things that we as Muslims should recognize is that we Islam and Muslims should not be seen as a radical departure from the universal, you can say, the universal legacy of mankind. That is to say that what Islam taught to its followers was that actually it is a renewal of the faith that was already there, but the teachings or the faith that is very often forgotten by people. That's why Quran repeatedly says that tasdiq allazi bayna yadayhi. Quran only confirms what has gone before, and what has gone before, the teachings of the earlier prophets, the books of the earlier prophets. So wisdom and teachings, moral teachings, they were there, from ancient times. So in the Platonic and the Neoplatonic tradition, we have the concept of beauty, truth, and goodness, which are seen by them as identical. If you have read something from Plato and Neoplatonism, Plotinus and others, you will know it very well that for them, these were the three very important components. In fact, those three impulses, those three truths about human beings, which no human being can do without. Now, Quran may not posit beauty and truth as identical, but as we will see, that it does suggest that the two are very closely linked or closely related to each other. And I will be talking about some of the concepts that Quran employs. The concept of ahsan, sometimes translated as the best, but it could also be translated as the most beautiful. Now, I want to begin with the first observation. How is it that Quran was first experienced by the people? Now, we know that Quran was revealed to the Prophet, but how was it revealed? It was revealed in the form of word. That's why we say the Quran is a verbal inspiration. Unlike in the case of Moses or Musa alayhi salam, who was given tablets, Quran was a verbal inspiration. That is, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had some kind of experience, and then what would be the outcome of that experience? That he would say that this has been revealed to me, and then he would utter those verses, which then would be written down. Then what would happen is that people would carry those verses, from tongue to ear, as they used to call it. So this is the way that Quran spread among the first community of Muslims. For us, the experience of the Quran seems significantly different from that of its first addressees and first Muslims. For us, Quran is a book. It is a book. It was not a book for them. It was a revelation that was given to the Prophet over a period of 22 years. And it was given to the Prophet not in a single go. It was given to him over a period of 22 years, whenever there was a requirement of any specific verse, any specific command, verses would be given to him. And then he would pass on those verses to other people. That is to say that Quran, for the first recipients or the first listeners, the first Muslim community, was a living Quran. It was a dynamic text. It was not in the book form. And writing came much later. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ did ensure that it got written, but the focus was not on having it written. It was that it should be transmitted from mouth to hearts. So it should be preserved in hearts. And you know about the history of how Quran came to be, gathered, and how it finally took the form of a book. So, during the Prophet's mission, this was one of the things that the pagans of Mecca used to feel very uncomfortable about. And in fact, they used to mock the Prophet that why isn't, if you claim to be a prophet, why isn't Quran given to you in the form of a book? We don't understand this. Come on, give us a book. لولا نزل عليه القرآن جملة واحدة. Why isn't the book given to him in one go? But the Quran refuted this. It rejected this argument and said that no. وَقُرْآنًا فَرَقْنَاهُ لِتَقْرَأَهُ عَلَى النَّاسِ عَلَى مُكْثٍ وَنَزَّلْنَاهُ تَنزِيلًا. That this is the Quran that we give to you in parts, in bits, so that you recite these portions of the Quran to the people in small portions. وَنَزَّلْنَاهُ تَنزِيلًا. The word tanzil itself means that it is given in parts. It's given in small pieces. It's not given in the form of an entire book. As Allama Suyuti says it in his Al-Itqan, he uses the two words for it. He calls munajjaman wa mufarraqan. That is in bits, in piecemeals, and not at once. This is how the Quran was revealed. Which meant that the text was much more dynamic, dialogic, and responsive to the actual living conditions. And innumerable situations arose over a period of 22 years. Sometimes, the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would feel very low because of the response that he got from the invitees. And sometimes he was even commanded in Medina to fight against them. So those specific situations, those specific concerns, which actually arose from the context, they were addressed by the Quran. And for them, for the people, Quran was, a living text in the sense that sometimes they used to say, oh, let us wait for what the Quran says. If we don't have an answer to this question now, let us wait, let us go to the Prophet and let us ask him that, what does Quran say about it? The Prophet would sometimes say that, I don't know. You will find this quite often happening in the books of Sirah and early traditions, that people would come to him and ask him some questions that, say, what is this? What's the answer to this? And Prophet said, I don't know. Let us wait for the revelation. And I think one of the most remarkable and one of the most, at the same time, something that really makes you think and something that makes you shiver is that when that very unfortunate event took place, when Hazrat Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, was actually accused of misconduct by some hypocrites. And the only thing that was required was a verse from the Quran that all this slander is meaningless and Aisha is innocent. But that revelation did not come. It took 1 month for the revelation to come. And for 1 month, we have reports that, not to talk of Aisha, who was devastated, even Prophet and his close friends and close companions lived those 30 days in utter misery and suffering, because nobody actually knew what had happened. Although Aisha was claiming to be innocent, but the Prophet needed to convince his people, and they would not be convinced till God intervened, and God did intervene in Surah An-Nur, but not before 1 month. So Quran definitely therefore shows signs of evolution. Not evolution in the sense that Orientalists, interpret it the way they because for them, God is not the author of the Quran. The Prophet is himself the author of the Quran. So he adjusts the revelation as per the circumstances. That, from a Muslim point of view, is entirely wrong. So I said in the beginning that I want to focus on the oral and oral nature of the Quran. A-U-R-A-L and O-R-A-L. That is something which is recited and something which is listened. Because this is the way that it was actually revealed. It is in this form that it was revealed. It was not given to the Prophet in the form of the book. And it was actually, the first experience of the Quran was not like a scripture, like a written word that people would take home and then read silently. It was something that was recited. And recited morning and evening, and especially during nights. And we have enough internal and external evidence to support this. By internal evidence, I mean the evidence within the Quran. By external evidence, I mean the evidence outside the Quran in Hadith literature and Seerah literature. So Quran for them was a spoken word, a recited revelation. And Quran itself so many times calls itself a recitation. The word Quran itself means recitation. And in Surah Zumar, when Quran says that Allah nazzala ahsan al-hadith kitaban mutashabihan masaniya taqsha'irru minhu juludul lazina yakhshawna rabbahum summa talinu qulubuhum wa juluduhum ila zikrillah. It is talking about the experience of the Muslims who listen to the Quran. And it says that Allah has revealed it uses the expression Ahsan al-Hadith. Now, Ahsan al-Hadith is usually translated as, in English, as best of speech. But it could also be translated as the most beautiful speech. And then it says that Allah reveals the most beautiful speech, which makes the bodies of the believers shiver. Then their hearts and their bodies soften for or towards God, for God's remembrance, for Allah's remembrance. Now, what I want to stress in this ayah is first what the ayah says about the Ahsan al-Hadith, that is the most beautiful recitation or the most beautiful speech, and how it actually captures the phenomenology of the impact of the recitation on the people. Because it says that their bodies shiver when they listen to the Quran the way it is supposed to be listened to. Their bodies shiver, and then their hearts are softened towards zikrullah, towards the remembrance of God. So the idea is that the Quranic recitation gives you goosebumps, it gives you creeps, and then it softens your hearts. And it's like, a kind of cathartic effect that takes place. A kind of cathartic process that soothes your hearts. And then you find, your heart more readily, receiving the grace of Almighty. Now, just to, a few things about this Ahsan al-Hadith, why I say that it could be translated as the most beautiful speech as well. The word Ahsan or Husn in Arabic means, of course, beauty. But Hasan means good also, and Ahsan means best. But there is a suggestion in the Quran that you can, it's an equivocal term which can be used for the most beautiful also. And I can immediately think of Fiha khayratun hisan. When in Surah Ar-Rahman we are told about the women of paradise, there are two words which are used for them. Khayratun hisan. Khayrat would mean would refer to a moral quality, and hisan would refer to a physical quality, that is a physical beauty. So combination of a moral and physical beauty is how the women of the paradise are described here. So the point is that if you interpret or if you translate this Ahsan al-Hadith as the most beautiful the most beautiful speech, you immediately grasp that what is being said is that uh, beauty becomes a way, you know, the experience of beauty becomes a way or a mode of receiving the truth in your heart. So it's not like the experience of listening to the Quran is an aesthetic experience in the sense of, you know, disinterested contemplation, in the Kantian, understanding of the things. You know, for some philosophers like Kant, the experience of beauty is, you know, gives you a kind of disinterested satisfaction because you are not involved practically in it. So it presupposes some kind of detachment. Here, something different takes place. Here, the truth is carried alive into your heart, and it is through the experience of the beautiful that you recognize that truth. So, as I said, that maybe truth and beauty are not identical, but they do come very near from a Quranic point of view. Also, one could cite another verse that لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. The ahsan here perhaps does not mean the most beautiful, but does not mean the best in moral sense. Perhaps it does mean the most beautiful or the most attractive form, that we created man in the most in the best of molds, the best in not in the moral sense, but perhaps in its aesthetic sense. And it is said that when Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu converted to Islam in very dramatic circumstances, this is what he said: Ma ahsana hazal kalamu akram. How beautiful is this word? Anyway, this is just to bear in mind that Muslims have traditionally also recognized the importance of beauty, and that is why you have beautiful poetry, marvelous poetry, especially in Persian, also in Arabic, but especially in Persian. When Rumi has to explain the importance of beauty, because Rumi's Masnavi is full of stories, and those stories which are which have force and which are really beautiful stories. Even today, when we read them, we find how beautiful and how imaginative his grasp was. He tells us that there was a muezzin. This is towards the end of his Masnavi, or I think in the 5th book. He has 6 books. I think this is in the 5th book. There was a muezzin, a very harsh-voiced muezzin. And whenever he rose to give azan, people would rush to him and try to stop him, because his azan was so detestable, it was so bad, so ugly, that people would, beseech him, oh, please stop, don't give azan. But he would listen to nobody. So once he was traveling in a caravan, and the caravan happened to pass through an infidels colony. Then he explains that it was a Christians. He calls him infidel in the beginning, in the subtitle, but then later on he specifies that they were Christians. So this man, stands up. He starts giving azan. As soon as he is done with azan, a man comes, a Christian, comes running uh, to the Muslims, and he asks them, where is this muazzin? Where is this muazzin? Tell me. And they say that, what have you to do with muazzin? You mean that harsh-voiced muazzin who just gave that azan? He said, yes, yes. Where is he? And they take him to this muazzin, and he hugs him, and he gives him sweets. He gives him some money, and he says that, you have relieved me today. And everybody is surprised. What has happened? Then this man tells the story, his story. He says that, I have a very beautiful daughter. That daughter had somehow heard and read about Islam, and she was so much inclined to accept Islam that I had really very tough time with her. Day and night I argued with her that we are Christians, you can't leave your religion and accept the faith of the Muslims, but she was bent on doing it. The moment this man raised the voice of azan, she was stunned for a moment. Then she asked, what is this harsh sound? Where from is this coming? And somebody told her that this is the Muslim call for prayer. And she was bewildered. And she said that, is it really so? And by the time you had finished your azan, all her love for Islam was gone. That is the story. What does the story tell us? That truth, when it is couched in the form of the ugly, will do you no good. So truth requires beauty by its side. Okay. Yes, I was talking about Hazrat Umar's conversion. There's that story that you must have all read, that he was an enemy of the Prophet and the Muslims. He was, he was he was a real terror, as you might call him, because he would go after people and catch them. And one day somebody told him that, why are you hunting down people who have converted to the new faith? Go and look what your sister and brother-in-law are doing. They have already converted to Muhammad's faith. So he rushes to his sister's house. They are reading, at that point, they are reading Surah Taha. And when he sees them, he beats up his sister, snatches that piece, the parchment, from her. She refuses to give it to him. She says that, I will give it to you, but you have to first make ablutions because you are unclean, and then only you can come and you can read it. And he makes ablutions according to that report, and he starts reading those verses. Those verses are the verses of Surah Taha. Taha ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa illa tazkiratan liman yakhsha. That is, Taha, we have not revealed Quran to you to test you. This is Allah speaking to the Prophet, because he knows that what this burden of revelation means for him. So it says that, and as soon as he has finished these lines, his heart undergoes a change, and he's a changed man, and he then goes to the Prophet and he accepts the faith. There are numerous examples in the Seerah tradition, in Hadith literature, about how Quran affected those people who heard it. And that is why the pagans who were alarmed by this, they made it a point. They said that no one should listen to this Quran, because the moment you listen to this Quran, then you can't help it. It will, through your ears, it will enter your hearts. And once it finds its place in your hearts, then it is very difficult to displace it from there. And Quran itself testifies to this position of the pagans. وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَا تَسْمَعُوا لِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ وَالْغَوْا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَغْلِبُونَ. The mushriks say that, the disbelievers say that, do not listen to this Quran and raise hue and noise. Raise noise whenever Quran is recited so that you have an upper hand. And so many, there are so many, even when Quran talks about the experience of the jinn, at two places Quran talks about how jinn overheard the Quran. Now, it doesn't say that the Prophet was actually assigned the duty of reciting the Quran to the jinn. It says that the jinns overheard the Prophet reciting the Quran. قُلْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ أَنَّهُ اسْتَمَعَ نَفَرٌ مِّنَ الْجِنِّ فَقَالُوا إِنَّا سَمِعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا. You tell them, that is, O Prophet, you tell them that I have been told that a band of jinns overheard this Quran. They listened to this Quran, and then they said, "We have listened to a wondrous, a miraculous recitation." Or what you have at another place, وَإِسْتَرَفْنَا إِلَيْكَ نَفَرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقُرْآنَ فَلَمَّا حَضَرُوهُ قَالُوا أَنْصِتُوا فَلَمَّا قُضِيَ وَلَّوْا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِمْ مُنْذِرِينَ. That is, when we made a band of jinns pass by you when you were reciting the Quran, and when they listened to this Quran, they said silence, silence, and they listened to the entire recitation. And when it was over, then they went to their people. Then they went to other jinns. Again, the point is that the jinn or the men of the Prophet's times, they listened to the Quran, and listening was somehow so important for them that it could not have made the same impact on them if they had just read it silently. Now, you take up the Quran and you just look for the words which suggest listening or hearing and reciting. You will find that there are numerous examples. Even in the modern times, you have many conversions. One of the very important names in the 20th century is that of Marmaduke Pickthall, who called Quran an inimitable symphony, the sounds of which move men to tears and ecstasy. Pickthall was a British writer and a novelist also. Then he became a Muslim and he wrote a very good commentary on the Quran. Even A.J. Arbery, who wrote, a well-known Orientalist who extensively translated Persian and Arabic works into English, he gives us that, he also wrote a translation of the Quran in Egypt. And he tells us how during the nights of the Ramadan, he used to go and he used to listen to the Quran, and how beautiful it felt to him. Anyway, I said that for Muslims, the word is the revelation. Okay, it is not in the in the Christian sense that a human being is revelation, because from a Christian point of view, the being of Christ or the person of the Christ is revelation, and it is in a way God in human flesh and blood, and participating in history. Coming down as a human being, living and dying as a human being. For us, it is the word which is the revelation. And it's not that the Prophet is a mystic of sorts. I know that it is a controversial topic, and there are philosophers and there are mystics who interpret the prophetic experience in a different way. But if you stick to the Quran, then the image or the concept that emerges from there is that Prophet is not like a mystic who goes into a state of trance, and then when he recovers from that trance, he is trying to clothe his mystical experience in his own words. That is not the impression that we get from the Quran, of the prophetic experience. The impression that we get is that For the Prophet, the words of the Quran were a sensory experience. That is, he actually heard these words. And he would remember those words which were revealed to him. Although there was some trance-like situation sometimes, not always, sometimes it was like a trance-like situation at the moment of revelation. But then it's not that he was, he was looking for the most appropriate verbal articulation of an ineffable religious experience. Mystics will tell you that mystical experience is basically incommunicable because words do not do justice to that experience. Words cannot capture that experience. That is not how we understand the prophetic experience. In fact, it is the word which makes the prophet what he is, not the other way around. And we know that this is one of the distinguishing features of our revelation, that is the Quran, because if you compare it with some other revelations, and the nearest to us is the Christian or the Jewish by God's revelation, they don't actually mean that the word was revealed to the apostles or to the prophets who actually wrote it down. They hold, and they have maintained this throughout history, that these people who actually wrote the Bible, they were people, they were humans, but they were inspired men. So they wrote under some kind of divine inspiration. But this is not the case with the Quran. It's not that the Prophet wrote it under divine inspiration. I'm reminded of of an interesting event which happened in Berlin. An Iranian scholar, a well-known modern scholar of Iran, is Abdul Karim Surush. Surush was delivering a talk, and he was giving his own thesis of his revelation. And one of the things that he said was that Arabic is accidental to the Quran. And the idea is that Quran could very well have been revealed in some other language. So the fact that it is in Arabic is historical, contingent, and therefore accidental, because it's not necessary to Quran as the word of God, because God has spoken to earlier people, to earlier prophets in their own language, as is testified by the Quran itself. What is interesting is that those people who were, there were Arabs there, and two of the most distinguished Arabs who were actually sharing the days with Abdul Karim Surush, one was Muhammad Arkoon, the other was Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid. Now, this is not the time when I was in Berlin, this is much before that. I came to know about it much later. They reacted very sharply to this. And he was astonished, as per reports, that why are they reacting so sharply to this? Because people like Muhammad Arkoon and Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid are not really known for their orthodox or conservative opinion. But the point that emerges from here is that perhaps a non-Arab does not appreciate the Quran in the same way, or perhaps cannot even appreciate Quran the same way that an Arab can. So the point is that perhaps for a non-Arab, it is the message which is couched in the words which is important, and he's trying to look for that message. And for an Arab, he cannot distinguish message from the word. You know, if you have read some linguistic theories, you will realize that how profound this question is. And in fact, uh, maybe generally it is not even defensible to hold that any message can exist in uh, you know uh, you can differentiate between message and the medium. But to appreciate it, that is the point, to appreciate the importance of the medium for the message. And I think the best classical work done on this is by Abdul Qahir Jurjani in his two great works, Asrarul Balagha and Dalailul Ijaz, where he actually, anticipates modern theorists, modern Western theorists like Coleridge, Lotman, and many others who talk about the unity of the medium and the message. But the point here is that how important is the medium? How important is the form? To use another very common distinction of form and content. How important is the form or the word of the Quran? And could Quran have been Quran if it had not been given the structure, the word that it has, the medium that it has? It seems that with any slight alteration in the medium, the message itself would have undergone a transformation. Okay, how much time do I have?
You have 5 minutes more.
Oh, just 5 minutes. So out of the 20 pages that I had prepared, I have just done 5. Okay. I will just now, in 5 to 7 minutes, I will not talk about what I had thought that I would talk about. I would just skip all this and I would go to one important thing that I had to share with you is that when you talk about Quran and poetry, that is because this is what the first disbelievers thought that it is. They thought that Quran is poetry. Now, we will not go into the details. I will just come to the main points here that I wanted to discuss. Now, what did Quran do? Quran denied that it is poetry because it said very clearly, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ شِعْرَ وَمَا يَنبَغِي لَهُ, that we have not taught him poetry, and Quran is not poetry. And it denounced the contemporary poets because they had absolutely no moral, standards or that integrity to be the leaders of their people. And it was wrong, according to Quran, to equate the prophet with the poets. But Quran did strike them as poetic, and in fact, very, very poetic. And that is why they were confused because they could not come up with a response to this poetry. The eloquence of the Quran, it frustrated them. That is why you have the concept of ijaz, which actually means something that frustrates. So rather than translating ijaz as inimitable, it should, I think, be translated as incapacitation, something that renders you helpless. And that was the experience of the first, disbelievers, that they could not come up with any explanation of what kind of a revelation it is. They called it poetry, but they knew that it was much more than poetry. So as far as its linguistic form is concerned, it did evoke a horizon of expectations, but it did exactly at that time, the time it created this sense in its listeners that perhaps it's poetry. It turned out to be something which for them was an antithesis of poetry. So although it did employ poetic devices, many poetic devices, but ultimately it was not poetry. In fact, it was an exact antithesis of poetry. The point is that uh, when the Quran was first experienced by people, they thought that perhaps it is poetry. But when they pondered over it, they realized that it is not poetry, because actually what this text is doing, that it is subverting all those norms and values which we have held dear uh, in our lives. As far as its content is concerned, it was a total negation of their life, their worldview, and their lifestyle. I don't know how to rush through this, because I actually had to talk about an important point called the spectrum of signification, where I would be talking about uh, how Quran uses different modes of expression, and how on a spectrum we can actually try to identify various uh, you know modes of Quranic utterance in terms of, I will just briefly say it in a couple of minutes so that I finish on time. Uh, when I say that there is a spectrum that has to be kept in mind, you know, how it basically goes back to the question of how does language mean? Is referential purpose the only purpose of language, or the only goal of language, or no? Now we know, as students, and many of you are students of literature and linguistics, you know that language plays, many roles, and words are not always used for their referential purpose. Sometimes they have an expressive purpose. That is, the focus in an expressive utterance is more on the inner state of the speaker. Sometimes they have an appellative thrust. Here, the focus is more on uh, the purpose or the state of mind that the word is trying to evoke in its audience or in its readers. Sometimes the word itself, the object, the sign itself becomes the object of stress and importance. So, in my understanding, Quran actually employs a vast variety of such modes, and it would be very useful if we could understand how uh, how all these such a and a great variety is employed by the Quran, that would also pave a way for a proper hermeneutics of the Quran. I had some idea of saying something about how Quran should be approached, keeping in mind that the basis of the aesthetics that I have talked about.